Hi, everybody. This is Klaus Ehlers. This is Facebook Live, Klaus in 60 Seconds, live on Facebook, where we take about 15, 20 minutes for conversations with people whose work intersects with ours at Family Promise. And we always have these really interesting conversations. We're going to have one of those today. I am the CEO of Family Promise. We are the largest national organization addressing the issue of family homelessness. And today's guest is Jeff Olivet. And I would describe Jeff as a homelessness, trauma, racial justice raconteur. He is one of the deep thinkers within our space around the issues of homelessness and the attendant elements to it. A very provocative, challenging philosopher. And we're going to kind of go deep into some of the issues around structural racism, around trauma, around current systems. And look at how things could be done better, could be done differently. So with that, I am going to invite Jeff to join me. He is fortunately not on my porch, which is about 98 degrees today. This probably wasn't the best idea to do it from my porch, but so be it. It's a nice porch. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Klaus. Really nice to see you again.
Well, likewise. I'm going to actually start with the guitars because I was a guitar player as a teenager, not a particularly good one. Who's your favorite guitarist? Who's your guitar god?
Oh, there are so many great guitarists. I'll go with Django Reinhardt. Just a little gypsy jazz to get us going in the morning or the afternoon, whatever time it is right now.
Cool. I'd go with Grant Green. Grant Green is my personal favorite. And then, if you've ever heard of Amdu Mokhtar, who is a desert blues player, one of the kind of the Tuareg blues, that's fantastic. Anyway. So moving on to other topics. So Jeff, you and I met when you were CEO at C4 Innovations. How did you get into working in the sector of homelessness?
I started my work in homelessness in 1994, volunteering at a day center in Boston, right off of Boston Common, a place called St. Francis House. I ended up working in overnight shelters in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and doing street outreach with the Albuquerque Healthcare for the Homeless Project. I was a case manager. I ran housing programs, and then shifted into national policy and advocacy work almost 20 years ago now.
We can talk about in 25 years of homelessness, what have you seen that has changed and what have you seen that hasn't changed? I think that's going to probably weave itself into our conversation down the road. But you would want to talk specifically about structural racism, which I think is so critically important. Our belief here is that if there were no structural racism, there would be no family homelessness, because it would essentially mean we had a society that was equitable and wouldn't allow family homelessness to exist. That's been an evolution for us as an organization to really center on that fact, which was always the fact, but something I think a lot of us in the space of homelessness, if we knew it, and we kind of put it to the side and said, we just got to do the things we got to do. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you have seen the understanding and reckoning with structural racism evolve in the field of housing and homelessness?
First of all, I think it's been very slow in coming, very long in coming, and long overdue. The homelessness sector, from my point of view, has been colorblind. I say that in not so great air quotes, for way too long. And there were people documenting this decades ago, that there was a huge overrepresentation of Black and brown people in the homelessness population as early as the mid 1980s. Kim Hopper and others, Dennis Culhane in the 90s, Donald Whitehead. People have been writing about this for a long time, but it wasn't really until the last 3 or 4 years that as a movement, we've started to embrace racial equity as a central element in our understanding of homelessness and our diagnosis of it, and in our solutions to homelessness. That if we don't pull it out by the root, if we don't address the deep structural underlying racism that is driving high rates of homelessness for people of color and families of color, then there's no way we'll ever end it, to your earlier point. So I think there's been a gradual awakening that's taken way too long, but here we are now. I feel like as a field now, we're at the point of saying, yep, there's a problem, but we haven't quite figured out what to do about that problem yet. We haven't figured out where the boundaries of our work as advocates and service providers and people trying to end homelessness and prevent homelessness, how far upstream do we go? And how do we actually turn off some of those faucets that are driving inflow into homelessness.
Yeah, that is a challenge that we all grapple with, and it's interesting because, it was starkly evident. I mean, particularly with our model, which had all these volunteers primarily from more middle-class, suburban, affluent communities, so overwhelmingly white volunteers serving always majority guests of color, from the inception of our organization, which is part of the reason why I think, and I bear the brunt of this, it was really a failing that we hadn't addressed this squarely earlier, because it was always starkly evident. It was something that people talked about, but never talked about, well, then what do we do about it, and what does this mean about our systems? And I emailed you earlier today too, because I was reading a bunch of stuff, and we've created all these systems, all these tools, all these techniques to address homelessness. And first of all, we don't see a diminution in family homelessness. I mean, you do if you take the HUD count, but obviously not if you take the McKinney-Vento numbers, if you take the Department of Education numbers, or you just take the empirical evidence before providers. And you have things like the VS for that, which, so do you want to speak a little bit about tools like the VIS for that and structural racism?
Sure. I think there's a fundamental flaw in our thinking about how we end homelessness. A simple way to think about this is we create homelessness at a societal level or at a structural level, but we try to solve it at the individual level. And it's sort of a mismatch of what's actually driving homelessness. If we understood it to be a structural failure around housing production and affordability, around livable incomes, around how we support families with children, around educational access and opportunity, if we understood it in all of those sort of root cause kinds of contexts, then we would come up with very different large-scale solutions. Instead, what we do is essentially treat it as a personal failure, people became homeless because they screwed up or something, which is just not the reality. I think we all make bad decisions. Not everyone is punished with homelessness for that. And it's a combination of sort of often individual vulnerabilities with these huge structural causes. What we're doing, though, is creating very individual based solutions. And I'm not saying we shouldn't provide very contextual and tailored services and support for people, but we need more investment in housing on a massive scale. We need a serious look at all of the racial inequality in our society and come at those disproportionalities and inequities with very clear public policy that ends homelessness on the scale in which we caused it. So that's the backdrop. What we then do is we ration services, we ration housing slots. We try to basically define away the problem. And you, I think, alluded to this in your definitional comment about HUD's count versus Department of Education and that sort of thing. But we try to scale the problem to the resources that are available, as opposed to scale the resources and the housing and the services and supports to the actual size of the problem. Now, the way that comes down to the kind of continuum of care level, or the so-called coordinated entry level, how do people come into the system, and then how are they prioritized for these limited housing slots, is done through tools and assessments and processes and procedures. And you mentioned the VI-SPDAT, the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Tool. Efforts like that I think, have been developed in good faith of trying to use resources as efficiently and as well and as thoughtfully as possible. But the reality is that tool and many others, many other approaches, were developed without any kind of consciousness of the racial inequities that are driving homelessness. And when you come at a problem that is rooted in structural racism with a colorblind view, you can have very severe unintended consequences. And what we've seen in community after community is the tools like the VI-SPDAT and a lot of the diversion programs and efforts to sort of prioritize and ration housing slots have adversely affected people of color, just like all policies do, unless you're trying to address the root cause of structural racism.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. We've looked at some of our programs, and again, I think it is important to understand people are approaching these in good faith. Approaching a often seemingly intractable problem in good faith is going to create approaches and outcomes that are sort of countered, because we're human beings, and it's incredibly difficult. But we've seen this with affiliates, and they've done analyses to discover that, for example, more white families are being placed in diversion programs and more black families in shelter, right? And I think it's really important that we bring these things up, we put these in front of us, and we deal starkly with, like, what is that, right? And what is causing that? What are the gaps in our own systems that are allowing those things to exist? Right. I think it's really important for organizations to use data in that way, and to use that as a mirror, and and not, like we started off with, not ignore it. Something is pretty evident, which as you said, from the 1980s, it was evident that homelessness disproportionately affects communities of color. The other thing too, I'll just say to add what you're saying, is I think we've got to look at policy, and we've got to look at the nexus between policy and market forces that essentially profit off of structural racism and poverty and homelessness. And those things often come together. And so, I think the VIS, that's an example of, again, without intention, creating a tool that just amplifies that Venn diagram where policy and market forces disenfranchised communities. You're right. You're doing a different. The last time I saw you, you were at C4. You're now involved with Spark and other things. What's the impact you've seen by actually squarely addressing anti-racism, right? Addressing racism, like squarely trying to address becoming anti-racist.
I think it's transformative in how we as a society think about issues like homelessness and many others. I think you asked earlier about kind of what has evolved in the last 25 years. One thing that's shifted, I think, in the last 4 or 5 years is we've seen a lot more white leaders stepping aside and leaders of color coming to the forefront nationally. And there's just this incredible group of folks who are now leading national organizations. I'm thinking about dear friends and colleagues like Amanda Andiri with Funders Together to End Homelessness, Bobby Watts at the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council, Catherine Monet working on veterans issues, Donald Whitehead working to lead the National Coalition for the Homeless, Mark Dones, who is leading National Innovation Service and now is running homelessness for Seattle King County. That sort of cadre, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a lot of very good friends and colleagues right now, but that group of folks has transformed the national understanding of homelessness as an issue of structural racism. So the lesson there is that when people of color are in positions of power and authority, the conversation shifts. And that should challenge all of us at a national organization like Family Promise and at the local level with your affiliates in creating different combinations of people at tables of power, at boardrooms and executive teams and up and down organizational hierarchy. Who is sitting at the table really matters. And related to that, I think there's been a shift towards greater inclusion of people with lived experience of homelessness. And that is so critical to our understanding, our work, our decision-making, our program design. This problem cannot be solved by people who do not understand it from the inside out. It has to be led by people who have lived experience of homelessness. So I wanted to put those two things on the table. Now, you asked kind of what happens when you start centering racial equity, or what is the impact of that? I think we're at a crossroads right now as a sector. I think we have named the problem, and I think we're sitting around admiring the data. That's a phrase I ripped off from the good folks in Hennepin County, Minnesota, who say, let's not admire the data anymore, let's get to the work. And so I think we're at this place where folks recognize there is a problem, that homelessness is a symptom of structural racism, and they're a little bit in the early stages or even stuck with regard to what to do next. And so do we know the impact yet? I don't know. We haven't seen the numbers go down in terms of overall disproportionality of homelessness for black people and Native American people in particular, but Latino people as well and others who are overrepresented. So I don't think we know yet. I think the implementation of anti-racism, of racial equity, is the next step in our work together. And I think unless we figure out that piece, it's all talk, and it makes no difference in the lives of people of color who are experiencing homelessness.
No, thank you for that, Jeff. And to the points that you made, yeah, this is something I am personally grappling with because I'm a white man at the head of an organization that is serving primarily women, a plurality of women of color. And these are the questions that we grapple with. And I think in terms of lived expertise with homelessness, right, that something that we've done as an organization for years is really empowered a body, a council that really has a say on every major decision we make. But ultimately, as I look to the future, people like me and you, I'm going to assume you don't have lived expertise with homelessness. You may, I don't know, have been running these organizations for 40 plus years, and the problem's only gotten worse. That's a pretty simple statement there that has a pretty simple answer. And that's something we really need to work towards. The last thing I'll say is Amanda's going to be on in a couple of weeks. So I have she was our keynote speaker at our last conference, and I have her on August 6th. She was amazing, and I'm
very happy to hear that. She's one of the leading voices and thought leaders in our movement.
And just an incredibly lovely and generous person as well, too, as well as a powerful thinker and leader. I just so appreciate everything she does.
Klaus, I think you raised something that's really important, and that is what is the role of white people in the anti-racism fight? And I think there's a delicate balance between taking up too much room and inserting yourself, myself. Here we are, two white men talking about this, and I don't have lived experience of homelessness, to answer your question. Not inserting ourselves or taking up too much room, or not being willing to cede power and space and voice to the full range of gender identities, the full range of racial identities. And so I think I coach baseball and softball on the side. I've coached my kids' teams. When you're playing outfield, the first step is always back. You go back on a fly ball, and then you figure out where it is, and then you make a decision. And I think often, I'm not going to generalize too much, but for myself as a white man who's been a CEO, who's been a leader of organizations, my first step has always been forward and stepping into the space, filling the space, having the first word, the last word, being the decider, or at least feeling like I am, or putting myself in that position, as opposed to stepping back, ceding space, sharing platform. And then the nuance here is knowing when to use your power and privilege in the service of the work of anti-racism. And that's a lifelong transformational process. I grew up in the Deep South in the 70s and 80s. I grew up in Alabama at a time when integration was struggling to find its way in public schools and society more broadly, and it's failed miserably, the effort towards integration. We've gone backwards. But that worldview that I was inculcated with from the time I was a little kid, just in the air around me, is still something I'm trying to work through and transform and wrestle. I wrestle daily with what it means to be a white anti-racist and to be a trainer and facilitator and a colleague. I am part of a group that started a new organization last year called Racial Equity Partners, and we're doing amazing work all over the country with organizations. And I still wrestle with what is my role as a white person in this work. And that's 25 years on doing, racial justice work and anti-homelessness work.
I've had exactly those conversations as well too. It is because at the same time, we can have impact. But yes, it's the step back. I think it's a great metaphor. And I often talk about baseball on this program.
Good to hear it. Baseball, guitars, homelessness, anti-racism.
So the last thing we'll close out with is, to what degree are you optimistic and a little bit of explanation about that. And I guess if you're to 0 degree optimistic, that's going to be really depressing.
I am intensely optimistic.
Okay, good.
Not even a little bit. I'm intensely optimistic. And that's because I choose to be. I sometimes, certainly there are days where you start feeling overwhelmed or feeling hopeless, or, here we are decades into the work of trying to end contemporary homelessness. And when you look back at the hundreds of years of waves of homelessness before the one we're in now, if you look back at hundreds of years of structural racism, it is easy to feel overwhelmed. It is easy to feel futile, the efforts that we make. But we don't have the luxury of that. There is too much work to be done. And I also believe at my core that we could end homelessness if we chose to. I believe that we could become an anti-racist society, a racially just society. Both of those beliefs around ending homelessness and around ending structural racism are not easily done, and probably not done on the path that we're on right now. And so we would need to make some fundamental shifts in funding priorities, in policy and legislation and law, and so many other fronts, spirituality and faith, in how we treat each other as human beings, in what our core beliefs are about the fundamental equality of all people, regardless of housing status, regardless of racial identity, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of all the kinds of diversity, this beautiful diversity that our friends and neighbors and all of us bring together. We got to start thinking differently about each other and about all of these issues. Unless we do that, we will never end homelessness. We will be having conversations about race and racism 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 500 years from now. We've got to make fundamental shifts in funding, in policy, in approach, in philosophy, in how we think about these issues. But can we do that? Absolutely. We've made tremendous progress on multiple fronts. We see, I mean, you all see this every day, Klaus, people exiting homelessness and becoming stably housed and reconnecting with loved ones and friends and family and work and faith community. We see successes all the time. We just haven't scaled that up to meet the need of the issues that we're working on. Around racism, I think we're at a tremendous inflection point. And whenever you see progress, there's going to be backlash. And we're in a moment of backlash right now against anti-racism work. And that is predictable. It comes around every single time. It comes around at the end of slavery. It comes around at the end of Reconstruction. It comes around at the end of the great civil rights advancements of the 50s and 60s. And it's come now. And so we have to buck up and fight back against that pushback. We've got to continue to advocate on behalf of and shoulder to shoulder with people experiencing homelessness. We've got to keep pushing for ultimate and sustainable solutions to these problems. But I believe down to my toes we can get there.
Amen. And I'll offer this metaphor, but first I'm looking at the Facebook comments. Kelly, send an email to us, info@familypromise.org, and let's talk. So Kelly's watching, so hopefully she got that. And Mitch can send you a message on Facebook as well too. So I'll close with this metaphor. If you are trying to build a bridge across an inlet, and you come at low tide, and you do all this work and put down all these pilings, at the end of the day, you look like you've gone backwards because the tide is higher and you can't see a thing that you've done. But that's what enables you to do the next step to build the bridge. And I think that's how we need to look at it. And that's how we need to look at some of these rearguard actions that happen, these regressions. And we know historically some of those regressions have been pretty severe, right? You think of post-Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and various other things. But I am optimistic that I think we have enough strength, enough forward momentum, enough belief that we can minimize some of these regressions to continue to make the steps forward. So I share your optimism. Maybe not every moment of every day, but I share it. Jeff, I really appreciate it. This was terrific. It's great to see you. Thank you for the incredible work you do, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Klaus. It's been great to be with you.